Hi, I'm Dave Bogot, owner of the Sump Pump Company, and welcome to Sump Pump 101. We think it's very important that you know as much as you can about sump pumps and how they operate. I get a lot of questions from people who are confused between their main sump pump, their backup, and how they operate. So I'm going to explain that, and I'm also going to tell you what your sump basin is and how the water gets in there in the first place. First off, let's talk about your drain tiles. Drain tiles are pipes buried in the ground next to the bottom of the foundation. These pipes have holes punched in them, and the idea is that as groundwater rises up in the ground, it collects within the drain tile, which can be either outside or inside of the foundation. The idea is the water's collected in the drain tile before it can seep out through the crack between the wall and the floor. The drain tile routes around the outside of the foundation or the inside of the foundation and ends up in the sump basin. And that's where your sump pumps live, and they're designed to pump that water away, so it prevents water from seeping in and flooding your basement. Now let's talk about your main or primary sump pump. This is the pump that plugs into the electrical outlet and does the vast majority of the work. The way your main sump pump works is it sits in the bottom of the basin, and when the water level rises high enough, a switch triggers it to turn on. In this case, I've shown the most common float switch, so that float lifts up when the water gets high enough and triggers the switch. The pump runs and pumps the water up the discharge pipe and usually outside onto the ground. As you'll notice, in the discharge pipe we have what's called a check valve. A check valve only allows water flow in one direction, in this case out. Its purpose is to make sure when the pump shuts off that a whole bunch of water doesn't run back into the basin. The second type of pump system is called a battery backup. Let me show you. First of all, we have a second pump. It sits right next to that first pump. It's got its own discharge pipe. Comes out of the basin. Usually connects over to that existing pipe. With its own check valve. It has its own float switch. And then the cord comes from this pump and runs out to a controller that's connected to a battery. And that's how the backup pump system operates. Again, the reason that it is so important that you have a battery backup sump pump is it's not a matter of if, but when your primary pump is going to fail. And let me just tell you a couple of the common reasons for a primary pump failure. First of all, one of the most common is the switch can fail. If the switch doesn't turn the pump on, the pump doesn't work, you're going to flood. Secondly, the pump can get jammed or clogged. And if the pump is activated but has a piece of debris stuck in it and can't run, again, you're going to flood. Another common problem, the pump gets old and simply dies. Every mechanical device ultimately is going to fail, and your sump pump is no exception. And lastly, what happens if you don't have electrical power? Your primary pump runs off of the electricity, and if you have a power failure, it won't run. Unfortunately, one of the most common times that we experience power failures is during a storm, and that's when it's raining and the most water is going to be coming into that basin. So again, that's why it is so extremely important that you have a battery backup pump system. If you don't have a backup pump system, it's like not having a pump at all. So that's Sump Pump 101. We talked about your drain tiles in your sump basin and how the water gets into there. We talked about the difference between your primary pump and the battery backup system. I showed you how they work, and we talked about the important reasons why they fail and how important it is to have a backup pump system. So thanks for watching.